two former Democratic senators on opposite sides of this. Joe Lieberman, one of the founding chairs of No Labels, elected as an independent in his last term, and Doug Jones, part of a new group that's joined forces to oppose this third-party effort. Thank you both for joining us this morning. Senator Lieberman, let me begin with you. Back when you were running as vice president on Al Gore's ticket in 2000, you warned that Ralph Nader would be a spoiler in the election. It turned out that he was right. Aren't you concerned that's going to happen this time around?
No, I mean, we've made very clear that we're not in this to be spoilers. We're in this to give the majority of the American people who feel that the major two parties are failing them a third choice, both in policies such as we're going to release in New Hampshire tomorrow, but also possibly in a third candidate. And we've been very explicit, and we're just watched. If the polling next year shows, after the two parties have chosen their nominees, that in fact we will help elect one or another candidate, we're not going to get involved. The other thing to say, George, is if the two parties listen and maybe think about what we're trying to do, and they pay attention to the numbers Rick Klein spoke of. I mean, 60–70% of the American people don't want the choice of Donald Trump and Joe Biden again. An enormous number are now saying they're independents, not members of the two major parties. The two major parties are failing the American people, and that's because the American people see that the Republicans and Democrats spend most of their time fighting each other to maintain their own power instead of working together to fix our country and make it better. So we're trying to give voice to that majority of American people, the common sense majority that wants something different than the two parties. I'll just sum it up this way, George. The problem is not the third choice that No Labels is offering the American people. The problem is the American people are not buying what the two parties are selling anymore.
Have that argument, Senator Jones.
Would be wiser to think about that. Yes.
70% of Americans don't want Biden to run. 60% say they don't want Trump to run.
You know, those polls right now mean nothing, George. You know that. You've gone through this process before. The same could have all been true for Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter, for John McCain and Barack Obama. Polls a year and a half out mean nothing. And the fact of the matter is, we've got a president who has spent the last 2.5 years bringing jobs to this country, 13 million. He's bringing down inflation. He's brought Americans' allies back together. He's brought an infrastructure bill. He has brought a PAC Act and CHIPS Act. He's done all the things for the American people, but he has governed. He's not been a candidate. Right now, this past weekend, you saw that Biden-Harris team raised $70 million. 30% of those were new donors. That is not a candidate that is being rejected by the American people. And as Chris Christie said, it is folly. It is a fool's errand to think that a third party can win in this country. There is no way on God's green earth that they can get to 270 electoral votes, which means they will be a spoiler. One way or another, they'll be a spoiler. And as Rick Klein said, it looks like they will be a spoiler in favor of Donald Trump, and that will be the biggest threat to democracy that we've seen since January 6th.
This is Senator Lieberman. You said that if the polling shows next year that is the case, that No Labels would be a spoiler one way or the other, then No Labels would stand down. That sort of runs against human nature, doesn't it? Once a campaign starts, it's hard to stop.
Well, we'll see. Look, the polling a year and a half out, as Jones just said, really should be taken as a warning by the two parties. American people don't like what the two parties are doing, and they particularly don't like the two candidates that they seem set on nominating. So we're trying to offer a third choice, both in the policies that we're issuing tomorrow, which really speak for the majority of the American people. And I'm happy to say that in all our polling, we show that the American people are much more united than the leaders of the two parties who thrive on division would indicate. So we're in this. Listen, we have said all along that we're not yearning to run a third-party ticket. If one or both parties move more toward the center in their policies, George, and maybe think about the two candidates being so unpopular among the American people, we won't run. We also said we won't run if the polling shows we're going to be spoilers. But, you know, Ross Perot was not a spoiler. He took, by the exit polls, evenly from both parties, and he put the balanced budget on the national agenda as a priority. And lo and behold, President Clinton ran with it, worked with Newt Gingrich on a bipartisan basis, and got it done. In the last 3 years of the Clinton administration, actually, we ran a surplus in the federal government. That's why we're talking about running a bipartisan unity ticket for president. Unprecedented, at least since 1864. It's unusual, and we know the odds for third parties, but we think the American people are so fed up with the two parties and so pessimistic about the course that our country is on that they may well be ready for a third choice, a bipartisan unity choice next year. And if that's the way the polling looks, we're going to run.
Senator Jones, I know you've joined this group with my former boss, Dick Gephardt, to counter no labels. Is there a strategy in place to head this off? What is it?
Well, I think it's getting the same messages out. It is basically saying, you know, no labels is looking at a centrist candidate. We've got a centrist candidate, George. Got Joe Biden. Look at what he has done, bringing the infrastructure package together, pulling that together for the first time in decades to do infrastructure, for the PAC Act, the CHIPS Act. You can go time and time again. Senator Manchin has had a tremendous effect on the Biden administration's climate agenda. You've got a centrist candidate. I don't know why in the world somebody thinks that Joe Biden's administration is so far left, unlike a Donald Trump or someone else that is an extreme right. The second thing about this that I think the message has to get out is that no label says they want to be democratic. They want to give people a choice. But guess what? They're not disclosing their donors. They're not playing by the same rules. You got a bunch of mega-rich Republican owners who are pushing this agenda. They won't disclose who those donors are. And it's going to be those donors, and I presume Senator Lieberman, who are going to select the nominee. It'll be a coronation whenever they do that. That's not very democratic. That's not a choice. It's a false choice and really an illusion as to what they're doing.
Senator Jones, Senator Lieberman, thank you very much for your time this morning.
It is woefully irresponsible that extreme MAGA Republicans have hijacked a bipartisan bill that is essential to our national security.
Stop using taxpayer money to do their own wokeism. A military cannot defend themselves if you train them in woke.
Heated debate that go over the defense bill. One of the things we're going to talk about on our roundtable, joined by Donna Brazil, former Missouri Republican Senator Roy Blunt, USA Today Washington Bureau Chief Susan Page, and New York Times national political reporter Ested Herndon. And Senator Blunt, let me begin with you. You heard Jake Sullivan, the President's National Security Advisor, take a pretty hard line against that House Republican defense bill, also against Senator Tommy Tuberville, who's holding up military appointments over the issue of abortion. What's your response to all that?
Well, on the defense bill, I think eventually there'll be a bill that has about 300 plus House members vote for it. But that wasn't the bill they were able to pass this week. I was most concerned, frankly, from my own point of view, about what they do in that bill on Ukraine. And 2/3 of the Republicans defeated any amendments that would have moved us away from a commitment to Ukraine. So I would think the administration should feel good about that. And those of us who believe we have a specific role in the world that has to be played by the United States should feel good about that.
But you're confident the Senate is going to strip out those controversial amendments over abortion, over diversity training, over transgender issues?
Often the defense bill passes very late, the authorization bill, but it always passes with a big bipartisan vote. I think that'll happen again this time.
Don, it's pretty clear at least the House Republicans and many running for president right now think these woke issues are their key to victory.
Absolutely. They think somehow or another the cultural wars that they're really launching against the American people will somehow or another give them an edge when it comes to the fall election, next fall. George, I was struck by some of the amendments. I mean, look, at a time when we're trying to make sure that we have the best fighting force in the world, here you have a lawmaker from Arizona, Congressman Crane, who referred to so-called black people as colored people. And then he said, I mean people of color. But he's doing this at a time he was trying to strike out diversity and inclusion programs in the Defense Department that essentially helps to bring people into the military, help them work together, and to ensure that we have a fighting force. This bill is important. It raises the pay of people in the military. It enables women who have issues, problems with their reproductive health to get the best possible help. And what the Republicans are doing, they're layering it with what I call social cultural ward issues.
Susan Page, one of the things we're seeing here is that Kevin McCarthy really has to negotiate a very tough road here in the House, and it appears that his most conservative members have the most power right now.
Yeah, I think Senator Blunt has a pretty rosy scenario of what's ahead. I'm sure that the Senate, the Democratic-controlled Senate, is going to strip out these measures on access to abortion for people in the military, on diversity training. But I don't think it's at all clear that this Republican-controlled House is going to be willing to accept that version. You know, it is one of the final pieces of legislation that had a partisan history, passed with 350 votes last year, passed the House this year with 219 votes. That is a reflection of just the way our polarized politics has infected basically every piece of legislation.
And it's that inside the Republican Party right now, it appears that, at least for now, cultural issues, for the most part, are trumping national security.
Absolutely. It's a change of what we have come to know as kind of kitchen table issues. This version of the Republican Party is thinking of a kind of kitchen table where wokeism or anti-wokeism is the main topic of discussion. We see this reflected in the presidential race. We see this reflected in Congress. And it's really Speaker McCarthy not being able to marginalize a small minority of his caucus that's really driving this. And he's not able to do that partially because the leading figure of the Republican Party, whether it be Donald Trump or whether it be Ron DeSantis, his main challenger, are using this kind of glimpse to mobilize the base. This is the core of how the party has shifted from when we think about 10, 15 years ago to now. And the reason it's not been uprooted is for many of those base Republicans, the folks who are left, they like that shift. It is not a shift that is unpopular. They're responding to at least the most ardent portion of their base. They are driving that, and that's part of the reason I think Susan's right. We can't assume that this version of the GOP Congress accepts a stripped-down bill, even though in the history with this type of bipartisan important legislation.
Donald, let's pick up on this no labels debate. Democrats are terrified that the strategy will lead to Donald Trump getting elected.
Well, Democrats have a lot of experience of third-party candidates basically biting at our heels and, of course, turning the election over to the Republicans. We saw that in Ralph Nader in 2000. I experienced it personally. I'm no longer crying. And we saw it again in 2016 with Jill Stein. So, yeah, we know this is going to be a close election. George, regardless of where the polls stand today, it's going to come down to 3 or 4 states and likely less than 100,000 people across those states. So, yeah, every vote matters. We have a multi-party system in the United States. I tell it to people all the time. You want a socialist, a libertarian, a reform, whatever you want. So I don't see them filling a vacuum. I see them trying to make an argument that there needs to be a moderate. Well, the moderate is Joe Biden. That's the moderate in the race. They're saying that there needs to be another choice. Well, we offer plenty of choices in American politics.
Roy Blunt, it sure seems like a lot of big Republican donors want this third party.
Well, if the model's Joe Biden, 70% of the people don't want the model. And 60% of the people don't want the alternative. So that creates an environment to where people are looking for something else. Now, in our system, the structure doesn't lead itself for that to be a
realistic path to victory, right?
Realistic path to victory. Candidates matter. There's no candidate here. This will always be a more popular polling issue without a candidate than it is when you begin to have a candidate. That candidate appears not to be there. And even if there was a candidate, the 2 times when you had a candidate that really significantly performed on the debate stage, 1980 and 1992, the incumbent president lost. The only time an elected president lost their reelection campaign since World War II were those 2 instances, and there was a 19% candidate with Roth and a significant candidate with Congressman Anderson. I don't know how it impacted the election, but it certainly didn't impact the election with either of them getting any electoral votes.
Instead, it is true, no actual candidate, and basically sort of bromides for policy prescriptions. It all sounds great until you actually engage in the campaign.
Until you actually engage in the campaign, until you add meat to the bones of this theoretical unity ticket. You know, talked to Senator Lieberman and Ryan Clancy of No Labels for an hour for our podcast, The Run Up. And one of the things that becomes very clear is that they are identifying a real thing, right? There are 70, 60% of people who don't want these two candidates as the leading folks for the next presidential election. It's the solution that's really murky. When we talk to people who don't want either members of those parties, they don't want Biden or don't want Trump, they're not coming from an ideological perspective. They're not saying that's a reason why I want a centrist or moderate or someone like Joe Manchin. A lot of those people told us they think people are too old, or they think politics is too top down and too important from the rich, and not, or they want to see the system be blown up further. None of this leads to those kind of third-party candidates, and that's the kind of sleight of hand No Labels is doing here. I think Senator Jones was really right to call out the kind of anti-democratic nature of this. People who will be selecting those candidates are these kind of insider, rich donor Republican folks, and so for all of their saying that this is a kind of democratic movement for a third party, it's not really reflecting what we see from people who don't like either of those candidates.
And generally, Susan, these third-party candidacies are fueled by a charismatic candidate, not a set of policy proposals.
Yes, that's right. And of course, you don't need to get a majority of the vote. You don't need to win an electoral vote. You don't need to win a state in order to affect the election. And the person who should know that is Joe Lieberman, who is not a former vice president today, because Ralph Nader siphoned off thousands of votes in Florida in 2000.
Roy Blunt, let's talk about 2024 more broadly at this point. You just heard Chris Christie earlier in the program. He thinks that Donald Trump is going to show up at the debate. What do you make of Donald Trump's standing in the party right now? As I said at the top of the program, it appears that he's solidified his most loyal core supporters, but there are more questions out inside the broader Republican electorate.
Well, I think that's right. I think a lot of things could happen here, frankly, with either of these candidates. They've both been president. They're older than candidates normally are. There are legal problems on both sides. I'm not absolutely sure what happens here, but clearly we know who the two leading candidates are. I'd be surprised if President Trump shows up at the debate. He's got not much to gain by being there. He elevates the event. I'd be less surprised if President Trump decided, I'm going to have a big event of my own at the same exact time of that debate, maybe in the same city, and see what happens.
You're nodding your head.
Yeah, no, it sounds very Trump-like, right? The kind of counter program even saw over this weekend. The reason why he skipped that Faith and Family Forum in Iowa is because he believes it gives us oxygen to his opponents. And also, we haven't seen an electorate really penalize him for skipping those events. They're not holding him to a kind of standard that says that he has to go earn the nomination as Governor Ron DeSantis. If anything, we've seen his challengers fall further and further behind him. Trump is a known quantity for the Republican electorate. And for a lot of those people, what they know, they like. And that is what he is betting on to really get him all the way through. And even if it cost him in a state like Iowa or New Hampshire, a place that really values that type of retail campaigning, he's betting that the kind of national picture is so tilted toward him that kind of swallowed that. I mean, it reminds me a little bit of Joe Biden in the 2020 primary for the Democratic side, where there was always an understanding that the national appeal was greater than those first two states. And frankly, I think they think that they cost themselves by really engaging in that Iowa and New Hampshire early.
Susan, with the exception of Chris Christie and Asa Hutchinson, perhaps, on the Republican side, the other candidates have been afraid to take on Donald Trump directly. I have to believe that the closer we get to the actual votes, that's going to change.
Yeah. They haven't taken him on. They haven't found a way to dent him. Donald Trump has not been dented by the process so far. He's been strengthened. We've seen Mike Pence not even qualify, at least so far, for the first debate. We've seen Ron DeSantis, as once pretty formidable standing, really fade in a significant way. He's now got a little bit of a staff shakeup going. So why should Donald Trump go to the debate? Why should he change his tactics? And how can these other candidates confront him in a way that holds his voters but takes him down? They have not figured that out.
Well, George, he is coming under a withering attack, whether it's from Chris Christie, who I was quite surprised. His Tell It Like It Is pack is putting out an ad today that is jarring. I mean, calling Trump a liar, a coward, a chicken. I mean, will Trump sit on the sideline and allow Chris Christie or Asa Hutchinson or someone else knock him out? No, I think Trump is going to find a way, like you said, brother, that he's going to find a way to make this about him once again. But I was surprised at Mike Pence's number. I mean, you're vice president for 4 years and you can raise only, what, $1.2 million? That's sad. And DeSantis is still stuck on the runway. He can't get a lift.
Susan, we only have about 30 seconds left, but all in all, I'm sure Joe Biden is loving this debate inside the Republican Party. He also had some rare economic news this week.
Oh, yeah, and that is very good news for him, the easing of inflation. So Biden people think there are three things that could defeat them. A recession, maybe we'll avoid that, a health crisis. And the third thing would be a credible third-party challenger, and that is something that is harder for the White House to deal with.
Thank you all very much. Great conversation.
Thanks.
6 months from the Iowa caucuses, 5 weeks from the first debate, Donald Trump still the clear frontrunner for the GOP nomination. 2 indictments, more legal jeopardy to come, has solidified his base. The big question now is the broader GOP electorate willing to take the chance that he will run again and lose again? Now, as Trump feuds with Iowa's governor Mull skipping the first debate, will the rest of the field find a way to make headway? We'll speak with Chris in a moment. Chief Washington correspondent Jonathan Karl starts us off.
In Iowa, a gathering of just about every major Republican presidential candidate, except for the one with the big lead. He opted to stay in Florida. It was Donald Trump's latest Iowa snub, coming after he attacked the state's popular governor. He's upset that she's staying neutral, therefore not endorsing him. Will it hurt? Nothing has so far. Since he declared last November, Trump has weathered 2 indictments and a slew of other controversies. As the campaign enters a critical new phase, leading up to the first debate next month, the most notable movement have been the struggles of Trump rivals. The big question now, who will be on the debate stage? Trump says he may or may not bother showing up.
When you're 40 points up, why would I let these people take shots at me?
His opponents are desperate to break through.
Nobody is entitled to this nomination. You have got to earn the nomination. Doing things like these debates, they're important parts of the process.
With or without Trump, the debate stage may be a relatively small one. The RNC putting strict requirements. To make it, a candidate must have donations from at least 40,000 different donors. A few claim they'll be there.
That means I'm going to be on the debate stage on August 23rd.
So are you going to make that debate stage?
I am looking forward to it. I will be there.
I have qualified to be on the debate stage.
37-year-old tech entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy offered 10% kickbacks to anybody raising money for him.
And if you help me in raising that money, you get 10% that you keep for yourself.
North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum went further, offering a $20 gift card to the first 50,000 people who give at least $1 to his campaign. Others seem likely to miss the cut. The most notable name struggling to make it, former Vice President Mike Pence. In Iowa on Friday, Pence got a chilly reception from fellow evangelicals as he tangled with former Fox News host Tucker Carlson over U.S. support for Ukraine.
Your concern is that the Ukrainians, a country most people can't find on a map, who've received tens of billions of U.S. tax dollars, don't have enough tanks. I think it's a fair question to ask, like, where's the concern for the United States in that?
Well, it's not my concern. Tucker, I've heard that routine from you before, but that's not my concern. Anybody that says that we can't be the leader of the free world and solve our problems at home has a pretty small view of the greatest nation on earth. We can do both.
Pence has only raised $1.2 million for his campaign, raising doubts about whether Donald Trump's former vice president will even qualify for the first debate.
Thanks to John Karl for that. Now this push to get a third-party candidate in 2024. No Labels is going to be in New Hampshire tomorrow to launch a national tour with Democratic Senator Joe Manchin and former Republican Governor John Huntsman, touting the idea of a bipartisan unity ticket. Our political director, Rick Klein, is back with the breakdown. And Rick, explain what the group is trying to do here.
Yeah, it starts with Biden and Trump, and voters clearly want an alternative to the current president or the former president. One recent poll, 70% of voters said they don't want Joe Biden to run again. 60% of voters say the same thing about Donald Trump. And there's the groundwork is there if you look at party registration and party affiliation. Gallup's been asking this question for decades. What party do you identify with? And check out how the rise in independence has fueled so much of our politics. 44% of the country now considers themselves a political independent. Only 27% Democrats, 25% Republicans. That's a big, big gap. But of course, being an independent doesn't necessarily mean you're a moderate or mean that you're open to a third-party candidate.
We just heard Chris Christie say it's a fool's errand for a third party. Traditionally, historically, these third parties just can't break the lock on the Electoral College.
Yeah, look, this is how No Labels sees the potential map. They think that they can win the states that are here in yellow. And if they do all of that, that's 286 electoral votes. But, you know, that's a lot of optimistic assumptions. Take a look at this. They need to win Texas. They need to win Florida. Those are redder states, Illinois, Hawaii, some of the bluer states. And you need 270 to win. So this is a tall order for No Labels. And there's other states they think they can be competitive in, but it's going to be difficult at every step. And maybe the hardest thing for them is that they don't get to run just on this idea of a third party. You have to run a candidate. You mentioned Manchin, Huntsman, Larry Hogan, the former Maryland governor, and someone else who's talked about running. All of them are guys and men and women that have records, people that will be firing at them. There's going to be a lot of big forces out there, George, that want to make sure they're irrelevant.
You also heard Chris Christie say it's hard to know who it's going to help, who it's going to hurt. Most Democrats are convinced it's going to hurt Joe Biden, help Donald Trump.
Yeah, and look, they look at recent history. They look at people like Ralph Nader and Jill Stein, and a lot of Democrats are still convinced that their candidacies ended up impacting the election. We hear a lot of people that No Labels talk about Ross Perot, and he hit the high water mark for a third-party candidate. He got 19% of the vote when he ran in 1992, but he ended up with 0 electoral votes. So it's very, very difficult. And the other interesting thing to look at on this is some of the polling that's been out there recently. Our partners at 538 looked at all of the recent polls that have pitted Biden and Trump and then a third-party candidate, either a No Labels candidate or, in the case of Cornel West, someone who's running as a progressive in the Green Party. In all of these polls, George, Biden was either tied or up by a point or two when it was just a head-to-head. When he went up, though, against a third-party candidate, Trump was either tied or up by a point or two. The concern among Democrats is that Biden has a softer hold on his voters than Donald Trump voters who are going to do anything for his candidates. And just remember how close it was in some of those key battlegrounds last time around. 10,000, 11,000, 20,000 votes in the states that Biden won. Every single one of them had more than enough third-party votes to have potentially swung an outcome.
Rick Klein, thanks very much.